For the first time in over 2.5 centuries, Westminster Abbey is the setting for a state funeral after the death of the longest reigning monarch in British history. Today in London and in Windsor, we close one of the most significant chapters in the remarkable story of the monarchy. On this 10th day of national mourning, following the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the doors of Westminster Abbey are about to be unlocked to admit the large congregation for today's state funeral. It will be a day of grief, of course, and a day of gratitude as well. And the events here in London and in Windsor will be on a truly majestic scale. The past 10 days have seen a mass public display of respect and admiration for the late Queen and the lifelong service that she gave throughout Britain, the Commonwealth and beyond, as hundreds of thousands have made the pilgrimage to Westminster to pay their respects. All eyes on the Abbey and the doors open, ready for the congregation to arrive. And this state funeral will be attended by 2,000 guests, including heads of state, prime ministers, members of foreign royal families. The last monarch whose funeral was held at the Abbey, by the way, was George II, back in 1760. So this really is a day of history, as Britain says farewell to the monarch who broke all the records. Now, across the square at Westminster Hall, the Queen's lying in state formally ended a short while ago at 6:30 this morning. And the past 4 days, as we've seen, have seen queues stretching 5 miles along the south bank of the River Thames. But the opportunity to witness the scene in person, as I say, has now ended. And the next time we see the coffin, draped in the Royal Standard, it will be brought from the Palace of Westminster on the state gun carriage to Westminster Abbey for the service, which begins at 11 o'clock. And then following the service, the Queen's coffin will be drawn by more than 100 naval ratings in a long, majestic procession from the Abbey to Wellington Arch at London's Hyde Park corner. And there are more than 3,000 military personnel taking part in the procession. It's nearly 4,500 if you include all of those taking place at Windsor. And at Wellington Arch, the coffin will be transferred to the State Hearse for its final journey to the Queen's main home, which is Windsor Castle, where a procession will make its way up that glorious long walk and then into the castle precincts and down to St George's Chapel, where the Queen will be buried alongside her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. So, truly, there is a momentous day ahead, a day packed with glorious ceremony, glorious music, solemn worship, of course, at the Abbey, an experience that we will never forget. The state funeral of the longest reigning monarch in British history, a global event with many world leaders in attendance, and yet a very British event, an opportunity to say a last farewell to a much-loved sovereign. Now, the main ceremonial elements start just before the funeral service itself, as the Queen's coffin is taken from Westminster Hall to the Abbey on the state gun carriage of the Royal Navy. By the way, it's the carriage used for the funeral procession of the Queen's father, George VI, back in 1952. Senior members of the royal family, led by the King, will follow the gun carriage on foot. Now, the first procession, let's talk about that. It's the shorter of the two. It'll be led by the massed pipes and drums of the Scottish and Irish regiments, the Brigade of Gurkhas, the Royal Air Force. It will be a spectacular sight and sound. It will cross Parliament Square on its way to the Abbey, where the coffin will then be received by the Dean of Westminster and the Archbishop of Canterbury for the service. The second procession is much bigger. It's 1.25 miles long. It'll set off from the Abbey after the service at 12:15. It will involve thousands of military and civilian personnel, several military bands, members of the royal family and royal households. They will cross Parliament Square, go along Whitehall, past the Cenotaph there, past Downing Street, then turning left under the Horse Guards Arch, onto the expansive Horse Guards Parade, the scene of so many jubilant birthday parades for the Queen. And then the long procession will slowly make its way down along the Mall towards Buckingham Palace, past St James's Palace, past Clarence House, past Green Park on the right-hand side, around the memorial to Queen Victoria, past Buckingham Palace one final time, and then along Constitution Hill, heading for Hyde Park Corner, where there will be thousands of troops assembled at Wellington Arch. And they'll be there by 1 o'clock, and the coffin will then be taken by hearse to Windsor. Now, here on BBC One, we have unrivalled coverage of the day's events, with some very special guests joining us along the way. If you'd like unaccompanied coverage, well, you can have that as well. You can use the service on the red button. So at this point in the morning, let's see how things are looking over at the Abbey, with just under 3 hours.